Yeah, hi everyone. Good to be here. So I'm Josh Gibson. I'm the Vice President of Learning and Development for the Cleveland Guardians baseball team out in Cleveland, Ohio, which may seem kind of how does that relate to executive coaching and organizational development? But I think at our organization, we've really tried to not only build a learning organization, but a coaching culture to support that learning organization. And that is a lot of my work that I do for the team. So with that, though, I want to introduce our two guests here, and I'll be moderating a panel between both Ian Day and Rob Croner. And so Ian is joining us from Warwick in the UK. He's an assistant professor and course director for the postgraduate coaching courses delivered by the University of Warwick, which is one of the top 10 universities in the United Kingdom. Ian has an extensive career in HR, becoming the head of talent for a large international organization. He's also a very accomplished executive coach with 20 years experience of developing C-suite leaders across the globe. And Ian is also the co-author of a book, Challenging Coaching, Going Beyond Traditional Coaching to Face the Facts, and has also contributed chapters in other coaching books and written journal articles. So Ian, thank you for joining us today.
Pleasure to be with you. Thanks, Josh. Nice to see everybody.
And Rob Croner. So he's joining us from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Rob's a retired C-level human resources executive with over 40 years of experience building and leading successful HR departments for various organizations from healthcare, financial services, and manufacturing. After retiring, Rob pivoted to a second career in executive outplacement and career counseling. There, he helps individuals understand and navigate workplace dynamics, and more effectively managing career journeys and better planning for career transitions, including retirement. Rob, thanks for joining.
Thank you, Josh. Good to be here.
All right, so let's get started here because I know this time is going to fly by with the conversation between these two gentlemen. So jumping right in, question one, this one's directed at you, Ian. So you literally wrote the book on the importance of challenge in the coaching relationship. So based on your experience of when you've been challenged, what assumptions do you have when you hear the word challenge?
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, it's an interesting word, isn't it? Because I think it's a word that has some emotional weight to it based on our experience of when we might have been challenged in the past. And we might feel that the word challenge is somewhat negative, that it might be to do with being criticized. It might be to do with someone being aggressive towards us, exerting control, or maybe abusive. So you think maybe a teacher at school when you were a small child, challenging you about why haven't you done your homework? Why are you late for class? And then in your early career, it might be a line manager saying, why haven't you done that the way I wanted? Why aren't you here on time? So all of these sort of experiences of when we're young have an impact about how we feel about the word challenge. So I think it is a weighted word. It's not an emotionless word. But when I started looking at what enables people to grow and develop and learn, there was some research from the 1960s and 1980s. And it looked at support and challenge. And it looked at people learn and grow best when there's a balance of both support and challenge. So it seems like challenge can be a good thing, but it needs to be done in the right way. It needs to be done skillfully because it can help people look at their assumptions in a different way, look at their values in a new light, question why they have habits in certain ways and why don't they look at doing things differently. So it can just help push people out of their comfort zone a bit, but we've got to get past this notion that it's a bad thing. So I think it's clear to say that challenge, when we challenge somebody, if we were working as a coach, our ego wouldn't be in the room. So I wouldn't be emotionally charged as if I was a school teacher or if I was a stressed line manager. So challenge in the coaching room, it's not about being directive, it's not being adversarial, it's not about being aggressive, and it's done in a controlled, skilled way. And if you think about transactional analysis, where you've got somebody who could act in a parental way or an adult way or a child way, so you've got that transactional analysis interaction, it's having a conversation that is parallel on an adult to adult basis. So we're here as equals, and so we can be challenging in a way that serves people. Because I know 20 years ago, when I was coached for the first time, my coach, and I've not been, as I say, first time, not been coached before, my coach really challenged me. Sometimes the meetings were uncomfortable, but that unlocked something in me and inspired me and enabled me to be more than I was then because of that challenge. But it was done in a way that was empathetic. It was with the notion that I was capable of doing more and I could step out of my comfort zone and do more. And through that challenge, I experienced it firsthand and became a better person, higher performing, better, more contented through that challenge. So that's sort of what inspired me. So I think if we move beyond the weight of the words and our past experience and think about support and challenge, if we balance the two, we can help our clients achieve great things. But sometimes I think we're held back. And I think what enables me to challenge my clients is the notion that, going back to the work of Carl Rogers, that my assumption, my heart-held belief is that my clients are whole and resourceful. They've got agency. They're capable of change and doing wonderful, great things. Now, if I believe that, challenge can be very, very positive and help people grow. So I think challenge is a great way if we learn to do it skillfully and controlled, and we use that skill to help people step away from their shadow and develop out of their comfort zone. So it can be a wonderful, wonderful thing, but needs to be done skillfully.
Thanks, Ian. It's amazing. And Rob, just want to make sure you have a chance to weigh in as well. If you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Ian had remarked in his response, and he said it a few times before, about the importance of sort of having an adult to adult relationship. And I think one of the observations I would offer is that often when an individual's challenged at work, it's in the context of a relationship that is more, there's a power element to it. They're being challenged by a boss, or they're being challenged by an executive or something like that. And that, I think, makes it challenging sometimes to have, no pun intended, to have that adult to adult relationship that Ian was talking about. I think that's one of the great values of coaching, is that it sort of neutralizes that power dynamic, that the coach is there to help the individual, that you're not wrestling with, is this person on my side or not? When you're challenged at work, it's just oftentimes an emotional experience, and that power element is a piece of it. So I think Ian has such a good observation about the importance of that adult to adult relationship. And that's really something that the coaching framework allows to bring out. So I think that's really helpful.
Thanks, Rob. And so, sort of building on that, Ian's work and what he articulated is very much on the one-to-one relationship level. And Rob, a lot of your work has been building coaching programs more on a systems level, and some of the challenges that can come about when doing so. So I'm curious, when looking to build and embed coaching programs and really a philosophy of coaching, for if OD leaders and HR leaders are trying to do so, what challenges do you encounter or have you seen in building coaching programs? And then how do you convince leaders about the value of putting in that effort to build a coaching program?
Thanks, Josh. That's a great question. And I'll speak from the perspective of my most recent role when I was the head of HR for the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, but I've had the privilege, I guess, of building coaching programs with a couple of different organizations. And there's 3 or 4 things that stand out that I would just comment on and would be curious to hear other people's perspectives. I think one of the first things that we had to focus on was, I'll just call it reframing the impression of coaching. And what I mean by that is that, at least in some organizations, coaching can be viewed as punitive. An individual's not performing well, he or she's not doing what they have a rough spot or what have you. So they need to be fixed, if you will. Not that that's the right language to use, but there's a negative connotation or impression around coaching. So I think part of the work that we did was really try to get that out of the vocabulary and just focus in on the value, the positive aspects of coaching. That coaching is often a sign of strength, a sign of we're investing in an individual. And I could talk more about that, but that reframing that perspective, and the coaching was viewed as a developmental tool and it viewed as something that was positive and growth oriented was I think really helpful. I think that something goes kind of hand in hand with that is building trust in the coaching process. And what I mean by that is, when you're being coached, you're really being vulnerable and you're going into a process in which you're opening up and you're talking to an individual that you may not know all that well, you haven't had experience with it before. So you have questions around, how will my information be used to me? Will the conversations I'm having with my coach be confidential? How will I trust what is happening with this process? So we had to demonstrate to both the individuals involved in the coaching, to the coaches involved in the process, but also to the organization, the importance of the coachee and coach relationship, that's a confidential relationship. The boss doesn't get to go into the relationship and understand and hear what's being discussed in the relationship. So building kind of guardrails, if you will, around how to protect and preserve that relationship, making sure that the way that the data was used was appropriate. And what I mean by that is that if an individual is being coached, he or she has the permission to say, yes, you can take this conversation and let my manager know about it, or I'd like to have a conversation with the manager, but making sure that the individual being coached could trust that they were in a confidential relationship, that they knew how the information will be used or what would be said or not said about the relationship. So we just had to demonstrate that over time. And that I was listening to the earlier conversation, Lorraine was talking about that it takes time to get coaching embedded into your culture. You have to demonstrate the things over time. You have to have wins and show that, hey, you can go into a coaching conversation, you can have a confidential discussion, and it's going to stay with your coach. It's not going to go somewhere else if you don't need it to. I think a third thing that we knew going in, but you had to then you realize, okay, yeah, it's actually more than we thought about, was coaching is not a replacement for effective leadership. Manager doesn't get to put a person into coaching and say, my work is done here. It's now all on the coach. I don't have to worry about anything. We had to remind leaders that it's important that, your role in this process, not only the coaching process, but once the individual comes back out of coaching, goes back into their environment, they're in that relationship again with their manager. And what does that look like? So, we had to stress the importance of being an effective leader and supporting the coaching process and having conversations with your individual going through the coaching program. How can I help support this? What would be helpful to talk about? What are you looking for in this environment as you come back? So, we just had, unfortunately, too many situations where leaders would sort of advocate, I've done my work, it's now the coach's problem. And we had to make sure that we captured that from that perspective. And then I guess a fourth thing I would comment on is, when you're sitting in an HR leader's role, you're accountable for all of the services that you're developing and putting out from an HR perspective. And it's very easy, particularly in large organizations, for the different parts of HR to become very siloed and very, I'm focusing on my OD work, I'm focusing on my employee relations work. So we had to make sure that we were just connecting dots between what was happening in a coaching environment and how that fed into other parts of our HR work that we're doing, whether it was leadership development work or employee engagement work, what have you. So connecting those dots, while it's not a specific coaching aspect, it's vital that coaching is embedded into not just your coaching work and development work, but other parts of the work that you're doing. And then the last thing I'll say, Josh, is that there's always a budget question. So you had to make your arguments for, this is going to be an investment. We believe there are reasons to make this investment. Here's some of the returns that we think we will get in terms of retention or promotability or those types of things. That goes into your question about convincing, and then I'll get off of this. I think we from my perspective, we had to look at sort of creating a macro view of how does coaching fit into our overall talent development strategies. And then on a micro level, we looked for quick wins early. We found leaders who were interested in coaching, understood some of the value of it, people who would go into coaching programs, and we found some quick wins. And once you get a win or two or five, you start to embed that in your organization from that perspective. And then we really did pay attention to results. We did track retention rates. We did track promotability aspects. We tracked diversity issues and those types of things that allowed us to say, hey, here's an outcome of coaching that we think leads to success. And that's why it's worth the investment we're making from that perspective.
Great. Thanks, Rob. And Ian, I'm going to come back to you. Next question here to move us along. Are you able to talk about when you've grown the most as a person and stepped outside of your comfort zone? And then what are the factors that enable this to happen? Oh, I think there we go.
Yeah,
there it is.
Still, after years of using Zoom, I still forget to press unmute. But yeah, great question. Thank you for that. It's an interesting thing, isn't it? And again, I go back to the example of when I was coached originally, that the sessions were absolutely life-changing for me. So I was coached as I stepped up into a larger role in a corporate organization, and I was coached for a period of 12 months, so once a month for 12 months, and it was life-changing and started me on my journey. But some of the sessions were uncomfortable and really forced me out of my comfort zone. But they were absolutely fantastic. I'll give you one example. In terms of Myers-Briggs type indicator, the first combination of letters is introvert and extrovert. So introvert, somebody that thinks internally and does their processing before they speak outwardly, and the extrovert who engages with other people to create their thoughts and ideas and formulate those. I'm a very much an introvert and always happy to do that. So I was solving all these problems in my own head. And in this one coaching session, when I just couldn't figure out what to do, my coach said, well, who have you spoken to about this? And I was like, why would I want to speak to anyone about this? I'm clearly an introvert. And that just stopped me in my tracks. And oh yeah, I can go and talk to somebody. So it made me to question my assumptions, the assumptions that had got me that far in my career about I can do this by myself. I'm strong, I'm capable, I don't need to talk to anybody, I can solve all these problems by myself. But that simple question, who have you spoken to about this, made me stop and then gave me a completely changed my direction. More recently, other examples are, for example, I'm in a coaching supervision group. So we meet every 6 weeks. And there are often things, because we co-coach each other in this supervision group with the supervisor, but with coaches as well, very experienced coaches, that they often challenge me. And I go, I just almost like I get a gulp in my throat, gulp. Oh my gosh, I just had not realized that. I just hadn't realized that that's how I look at the world, and there are alternative perspectives. And it just forces me, that moment where you just think, gosh, there is another way of doing this. And I simply hadn't realized. So again, it's this, there's no aggression, there's no criticism. It's just that awareness of there's an alternative perspective. There's a different way of doing things. And another session I remember a while ago, I was being coached, and my coach asked me, what do you want? And I gave quite a superficial, high-level answer, and he could tell that. And he said, what do you want? And I gave a little bit more information. And then he said, what do you really want? And then he asked, what do you really want? And then what do you really want? So he asked that question 5 times, and it became more and more and more uncomfortable. But I was forced to step out of my comfort zone, to talk about my deep, deep thoughts and feelings. And that was a real breakthrough. That was a real breakthrough. But he could have accepted the first answer. But he just had this intuition that there was something else there. So he challenged 5 times until he got a really deep response. So it is that recognition that through the three examples that I've just given, that challenge can enable people to step out of their comfort zone. And I believe everybody is capable of greatness, and it's greatness as they define it for themselves. If I believe they're capable of greatness, it's for me to help them step out of their shadow, not keep them small, not keep them safe, through challenge. And I've experienced it myself, as I've just described. And so if I do that, to enable them to look at the world in a different way, to enable them to believe in their capability and their strengths, then they can do some wonderful things. They just need to be pushed or helped to step out of their comfort zone, which can, as it's called, the comfort zone, can be very safe, can keep them comfortable, but it also prevents them from growing and developing. So we do have to help our clients to step out of that, but there's this balance of support and challenge, with both the challenge to step out and the support to say, it's okay, you can do this.
Thanks, Ian. And Rob, just want to make sure you have a chance to, if there's anything you would like to add on this topic, whether it's about challenge and growth and using that for our development and implications for coaches and helping our clients do so. Anything to add?
I think the only thing I would add to that, Josh, is I think it's been used in other conversations, is just the importance of being vulnerable, or being willing to be vulnerable when you're in, I'll say, in a coaching relationship, but even beyond that. But most of us in organizational situations, you're trying to appear as if you are in control, you've got your act together, all those types of things. And we all have our inner voices that talk to us and self-doubt, those kinds of things that come through. So I had a good mentor who talked to me about the importance of being willing to be vulnerable and to say, I don't know how to do something, or I'm not sure how to handle a situation, or those types of things. And I think that willingness to open yourself up to say, I don't always have to be perfect, I don't always have to be in control, I can be helped. And I think when you're vulnerable and say you're willing to be helped, that just opens doors. At least for me, it allowed me to give myself permission, if I could say it that way, to say it's okay to ask for help, it's okay to seek out guidance, it's okay to seek out support. And when you're willing to do that, I just think it really creates a different environment for you as an individual. And then if you can take that and sort of pay that forward to others, I think that's really helpful.
Thanks, Rob. And coming back to you, zooming back out on an organizational level, how do internal coaching programs supplement or support other development initiatives?
Yeah, it's another good question. I think there's a couple of things I would just comment on quickly, and Ian has already referenced some of these in his own conversation. So one is, we made a point as we started to embrace coaching in a broader way at CHOP to embed the coaching process into other development programs. So if we were running a leadership development program or a management skills program, we would embed a coaching process framework, coaching cohorts into that program. So instead of just having a didactic where someone is saying, here's the 3 things you need to do as a supervisor, it's an opportunity to get some experience in a coaching cohort with individuals in the program. So the more we could embed coaching into other types of our development programs, the more people could experience it and could walk away and say, that was really helpful from that perspective. And then I would sort of a step beyond that, Josh, we looked for ways to embed it in other, maybe not core or pure development programs, but things like our employee resource groups. One example, we had a young professional network group, as we called it, a resource group, a lot of folks who were newer in their careers, and we brought coaching into that ERG process and said, here's a way that you can interact with other individuals to get some exposure and experience. So broadening the ways in which, or the various programs in which we provided coaching, made coaching part of the framework was helpful. We really worked hard to make sure that when we were talking in any type of leadership or management programs, that coaching became a core competency of our folks in those positions. So how do you become a better coach? Not just in terms of a formal coaching relationship, but how do you coach your employees? How do you coach your work team? How do you build teams from that perspective? And in that sense, and I think, Josh, you're living it, we looked outside of healthcare to say, well, where's coaching happening really well? We looked at sports teams who do coaching really, really well from that perspective. We looked at creative people, actors and theater people who have voice coaches or things that you wouldn't typically think of, but we look for ways to see where does coaching help happen successfully in other venues that we could say, go learn from that and bring it in. So the more we could spread coaching out into our different programs, that really helped us, again, build the trust in the coaching process. And Lorraine had something earlier in her conversation saying, when coaching is successful, people start asking for it. And we started people asking for it. How do I get into this coaching program? I'm hearing so much about it. And you could really say that you're starting to make some progress and those things are happening.
Yeah, it's so interesting, Rob, because we do the same, but in reverse, where our sports coaches are looking at executive coaches in different fields and learning from places like Penn and Case Western and other coaching programs. And, what does coaching look like in the medical profession, the teaching profession, and then using that to inform how we work with each other and work with players. So just really interesting to hear that your mindset was the same and looking at sports in other places. Ian, any other thoughts on this one?
I think you've put it really well, and both of you with that example of looking outwards and seeing what other people are doing in different environments. I think that's so important to learn from others, and certainly that's what I've been doing for quite a while now. Just finding out what else is happening out there, so we don't just become the same old. We can learn from people a bit left field, and I think that's really valuable.
That's great. Thanks, Ian. And so this question is really directed at both of you. Retaining talent in today's competitive market is crucial. There's a lot of talk about that on this conference, and in just about any conference related to organizational development or HR right now. And so some employees who are coached may decide to leave the organization. And so how do you reconcile this tension between coaching for individual outcomes and supporting the person you're coaching? And then sometimes when that may sit in tension with or conflict with the organization's best interests or needs, how do you reconcile that? Maybe Ian, we'll go to you first.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, well, I used to be head of talent, so this used to be very close to my heart because obviously we'd spend a lot of time recruiting the senior executives, so we wanted to get a return on the investments and also ensure that there were people flowing through the organization that would develop into senior positions later on. So it's very important, and it still is, particularly when we're looking at how do we get a competitive advantage with other organizations, particularly as we go into this, the fourth industrial revolution and the tech world that we're moving in with disruptors. So it's very difficult. I think there is an acceptance that people's careers take many directions. The days have gone when people would stay with the same organization for the whole of their career, or for 20 years or even 10 years. And I think there's got to be an acceptance now that people will move. Sometimes that will be a forced move through redundancy and or reorganization, and sometimes it will be a voluntary move for career progression. So I think we've got to try and say, how can I get the best from this person while they are with me? And if I invest in them and value their contribution and develop them, they will stay longer. And that could be through coaching. So coaching can be many things. It can be developmental, but it can also be symbolic, that the organization values the individual and wants to invest in them. And that can help them stay and be retained with the organization, as well as growing their career. But there is a realization that for everybody, there's a time of, I've done this for long enough, I want a new challenge. And it's just accepting that. And hopefully they can, if they move on with being a disciple of that organization, so they can tell their friends, their colleagues, that this was a brilliant organization to work with. They develop people, they really take this seriously. It's a great place. Next time there's an opportunity, apply. So they can really be an advocate for that organization. But while they are there, they are being coached and they're being even better. So the return on the investment is quicker and greater. But we've just got to accept people will grow and develop and they will move on. It might be because of coaching. Coaching might accelerate it. But I would say that the benefit that coaching delivers while the person is with the organization outweighs the risk of them moving on at a later date.
Yeah, and Charlene, to your point in the chat, whether they move within the organization or they can always come back, right? If you create an amazing environment and they feel like they're being developed and they're being coached and invested in, and then they leave because it's an opportunity that you can't turn down. Hey, that opportunity ends up not working out, or the next step in their career opens up in our organization. You know, the fact that they love the organization, how they were treated, and that they were developed and invested in, gives us a good shot there as well. Rob, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's something counterintuitive about the question, Josh, and I'll do one quick vignette and I'll respond to it. So I very much remember a conversation, an argument I was having with the CEO at Shop, where she was very concerned about, you're going to invest all this time and energy in people, coaching them, they might leave. What about that? And I reminded her, oh, you mean like you left yourself in your own career and then came back to Shop at some point later on. So, those kinds of things happen from that perspective. But if you look at any kind of meta analysis of turnover results, people leave fundamentally because they're not growing, they're not developing. And when you start to pay attention to them, and this is the counterintuitive piece of it, people feel valued, they feel energized, they feel like you're interested in my growth and development. It creates more stickiness. It creates more desire to stay and retain and stick in that organization, if you will. So that's been my experience in the different organizations I've worked with. When we've invested in people and their growth and development, informally or formally through coaching, we've seen improvements in our retention rates and our promotability and our ability, to Charlene's point about moving people through the organization. It helps our talent strategy from that perspective. Ian and both of you guys are right that sometimes people do move on. And my perspective on that is they're now an alumni and you stay connected to them, and you never know when there may be an opportunity for them to come back into your organization in a different role, in a different way. As Ian said, they become great ambassadors for your organization. If they've been treated well and felt invested in them by your organization, and then they leave for another organization, they're your best ambassador in terms of their ability to say, yeah, boy, CHOP is a great organization. They treated me well. They invested in me. So the evidence, both anecdotal and statistical, that we saw in our experience was that it created more retention value. More people wanted to stay in the organization. It was worth the investment. But let's not kid ourselves. In today's world, people have shelf lives in their jobs, and they're going to move to different opportunities in different organizations. And I would much rather be in organizations that are investing in people and helping them to move to the different roles to create that kind of longevity from that standpoint.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. And it is so counterintuitive, right? That like, if we're doing some of this work, it can, especially like in supporting people in their transition and being okay with that, knowing that we can't wrap our arms around every situation. It kind of creates a narrative throughout the organization that, wow, like even when push came to shove and I decided this could be a good opportunity, the fact that it was amicable and they were supporting me and like the development didn't stop.
Yeah.
That gets around, and people want to stay in an environment like that or come back to an environment like that.
Absolutely.
Good. Well, Eric, I see you popping on the screen here. I know we're probably pretty much at time, right? I can't push this.
5 minutes.
I got 5 minutes. Okay, can I ask one more question?
That's exactly what I was going to share. Okay. You've been doing such a phenomenal job keeping up with the chat and asking the questions along the way. So, Josh, we'll be really curious to hear what's your final question for Ian and for Rob, and what can the folks who are here today not leave the room without hearing, understanding, or considering?
Yeah, well, I was curious to ask. I didn't think I was going to have time, but I'll start with Ian on this one, talking about challenging the one-to-one relationship. And you hit on some of the things that were so important there in terms of being measured and controlled and not being adversarial and showing empathy and seeing the person as whole and resourceful. But if we're going to zoom in just a bit further, like if I'm like videoing you, or I'm a fly on the wall in a coaching interaction, or I'm watching that coach effectively challenge in the moment, what are some things that I would be seeing there?
That's a very interesting question, Joss. And one of the reasons that don't do demonstrations of challenging coaching. It's because people expect me to do something magical that's challenging, but you've always got to be responsive to the client and what's happening in the moment. And you've got to be willing to be flexible. And in challenging coaching, I talk about a 2x2 matrix, which is support versus challenge. And you've got to be prepared. It's a 4-quadrant model. You've got to be prepared to move based on the needs of your clients. I remember one session, this was session 3 of a 6-session executive coaching session, that the guy was 10 minutes late, and we had a contract to say that we'd both arrive on time. So I was about to hold him to account when he said, "Sorry, I'm late. I've just been told I'm going to be made redundant and I've got to the end of the week." So it was, okay, sit down. And it was 45 minutes of me showing unconditional positive regard and support and empathy and allowing the guy to offload. So there was no challenge at all, because that wasn't appropriate. However, there are times when I encourage people to delve deeper. What do you really think? And why do you think that? Why is it like that? What else can you do? And what else can you do? So you've just got to be prepared to be flexible. So if you're recording me, you might not see anything, but then at different times, you might see something that is just wholeheartedly with that belief that the person is capable of greatness, that I will push and I will challenge, and I might even provoke them in a very positive adult to adult way to help them think in a different way. So it's that understanding that you can be, you must be flexible to the client's need and respond using support and challenge as appropriate.
In our final 90 seconds to 2 minutes that we have, Josh, what's your final question and idea for Rob? And Rob, give us our one final thing that you're ready to walk out the door with. What are you going to leave us with today?
You know, I'm interested. You kind of stole my question there, Erica, in terms of for Rob, like hearing all this as we're talking the challenges of building coaching within organizations on more of a systems level. Like, what are 1 to 2 things you would give this group to say if you walk away with nothing else? This would be it. What's your take on that, Rob?
You know, looking at it from an organizational perspective, and this may sound terribly cliche-ish, but I think you need to be a champion or an advocate for coaching in your organization, and you have to fight for it. I don't mean fight in the negative connotation, but you really have to advocate for it. We all know the value. There's many people out there who are much better coaches than me, but in my role, I had the opportunity and the ability to bring coaching into the organization and help get it embedded in. And that doesn't happen if you're not advocating for it in the ways that make sense. So I think you just have a responsibility as an organizational leader, particularly a senior organizational leader, to be a champion for it, to advocate for it, to make sure that if you want coaching to be in your organization, you're the one who needs to make it happen in your organization from that standpoint.
You know, as someone who teaches how to be respectfully provocative as a leadership skill, I am so glad to hear you send us the door thinking about that. And that could not be a more perfect segue into where we're going to go next. On behalf of GSAEC, we want to thank Josh and Ian and Rob for being here today and getting us really considering that third layer around how to coach in difficult times from very different perspectives. And Josh, personally, as the bench coach for my nephew's Little League team who teaches strategy and used that as an example with a CEO yesterday and in terms of what we're going to do in thinking next, this was singing to my own heart. So we love metaphors in this world. You are talking to the right audience, and yay. And Rob, I'm also in Philly, so go Phillies. All right. So with that team, I'm going to thank all of you for being here today. We are now going to go from this final moment into a break.